Ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining me once again. So, today I would like to talk about the utter nonsense of how the astronauts acted when they landed on the moon. Now, I want to put myself in the position of these guys and think about how I would act if I was 250,000 miles away after traveling in a tin can that's never been tested in the elements that I'm in. And then you got to add the historical significance of everything. You're the first people to ever do this, correct? Not only that, you have no idea if you're coming home. You have no idea if that spacecraft is going to work in order to bring you home. You don't know if it's going to reattach to the lunar module. You have no idea if the rockets are even going to have enough thrust in the moon's atmosphere or surface, or because they say there is no atmosphere, right? You have no idea if those rockets are going to work. And you watch this footage of when Neil Armstrong steps off onto the surface of the moon, and how composed that man is. And not only how composed he is, how deep and rehearsed he sounds. So that famous quote, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," it's a great quote, don't get me wrong, and it's historically significant, and it sounds amazing when you frame it up in the context that they have it, right? But when you try to line that up with reality, it makes absolutely no sense. One small step for man makes no sense at all, because that was a 4-foot drop from that step. So you have to think about it like this. If you were to make that trip in a craft that's never been tested, with computers that have never been tested, with electronics that have never been tested, and then you make that 250,000 mile journey through the Van Allen radiation belts, through the harshest environment known to man, that's the complete antithesis of the natural world, and that's the vacuum of space, and then you finally manage to land on the moon. Listen to how calm Neil Armstrong, listen to how calm their voices are as they're actually touching down. When they actually touch surface for the first time and that rocket turns off, listen to how calm their voices are. There's no shaking, there's no cracking, there's no elevated heart rate, there's no giddiness, there's no fear. It's absolutely 100% professional, and it sounds rehearsed. You also have to take into account the fact that these people are completely isolated, right? They're there by themselves, and they have no support, no coming back. And what's one of the first things they do after they touch surface to the moon, right? They're out there playing golf, okay? Now, if anything happens to those spacesuits, man, they're fucking dead. And mind you, you're the first people ever to do this in untested equipment. Do you think that you're going to get on a dune buggy and drive away from your only shelter? Think about this for a second. What if that dune buggy would have broken down when they were a further distance and they could walk back to the spacecraft? And mind you, do you think for a moment that anybody, engineering-wise, is going to attach a rover to a spacecraft that's never been tested, when it requires extra fuel, it requires extra resources, and on top of that, it's 100% unnecessary, not to mention completely dangerous? What happens? You have no idea how that thing's going to react to the gravity on the moon, apparently, because you've never been there, right? So what if they flip that and they tear their spacesuits? They're dead. You also have to look at the construction of the lunar module. And just look at the pictures, look at all the jagged surfaces, look at how immature it looks. The engineering of that craft is absolutely ridiculous when you actually examine the high resolution photos of it. it looks like an arts and crafts demonstration. In all reality, that's exactly what it looks like. And I'm not telling you anything other than my observations when I say this. That's what it looks like. So let's get back to it. Neil Armstrong stepping onto the moon. Me stepping onto the moon, if I was him, I would have been scared shitless. And I think anybody in my position would have felt the same exact way. There is no way to avoid that feeling. You're 250,000 miles away from any hope of seeing your family again if anything goes wrong, man. And you're in an unexplored environment. You're the first person ever to set foot on a heavenly body. Like, just listen to them. Listen to them. And then you have to do the mathematics of the pictures that they took, because apparently they took a picture every 10 seconds while they were on the moon. And I'm not just talking while they were on the surface walking around. I'm talking from the moment the craft landed till the moment they left. They would have had to have taken 10 pictures. They would have had to have taken a picture every 10 seconds, sorry. That's impossible. Absolutely impossible. And then if you look at the pictures, everything's perfectly in focus. But if you believe what they tell you, those cameras were mounted to their chest and they had no viewing optics of the pictures before they took them. So they managed to take pictures that were in perfect focus every single time with the technology of that era, with a chest-mounted camera, with no viewing. Come on. Come on. My cell phone doesn't even take every picture in focus, and that's with today's technology. So let's be honest with ourselves, man. And then, like I said, you're the first person ever to set foot on the surface of the moon. And you're telling me that your mind is not preoccupied with your own safety and you're taking a picture every 10 seconds? And it wasn't on an automatic timer, so don't give me that bullshit. Go look at the freaking diagram of the pictures that they took to the moon if you don't fucking believe me, because I'm not telling you anything that's not fact, okay? I also want you guys to think of something logically. There's only one video of an astronaut in a vacuum chamber inside of a spacesuit, and he almost died, okay, because of the depressurization started boiling the saliva on his tongue, and he passed out. Now think about this logically for a moment. Assume that you're Neil Armstrong. You're about to step on the moon. You yourself are in a spacesuit that you yourself have never worn inside of a vacuum chamber with no atmosphere. And you're going to trust your life to this technology. And not only that, but the only time that anybody's ever stepped into a vacuum chamber, they almost died. Are you going to volunteer to do that unless you know your safety is guaranteed? Are you going to have the testicles and the cojones to step off of that spacecraft 250,000 miles away from any type of civilization, knowing that if anything goes wrong, you're dead and you're not coming home? I don't fucking think so. I don't know anybody that would be willing to take that risk, knowing somebody almost died in that spacesuit in a vacuum chamber. Okay. Now let's say this. Let's just assume that they did all of this and they managed to get back on that rocket. So they're sitting in the rocket and they're ready to go home, right? They managed to get a live feed of them taking off from the moon on their way back home with the technology of that era. You want me to believe that? Are you out of your fucking mind? Meanwhile, in the future, me today, I don't have a live stream of Earth from the moon, even though there's no technological reason why I shouldn't. And you mean to tell me that they had wireless Wi-Fi technology back in the 60s that allowed them to fucking capture a video of them actually leaving the surface of the moon on their way home? Who did they leave behind to take that video? How did they get it back to the Earth? Ask yourself this question too. Modern times, we have a delay between the ISS and the Earth, and it loses signal all the time. According to NASA and according to Russia, it loses signal all the time. Live feed isn't a 24-hour feed. It goes in and out all the time. But meanwhile, back in the 60s, here I am sitting on the spacecraft talking to Ronald Reagan without a delay. Are you kidding me? Just open your eyes to this for a second. All it takes is putting yourself in their position and in their shoes and ask yourself if you would be doing what those men were doing when they were on the moon. Would you yourself be swinging a golf club knowing that if that spacesuit rips or if one of those couplings come undone during your golf swing, you're fucking done? You're done. Not to mention, none of your training has ever been in the environment you're in, but you're standing there bouncing around, jumping, falling face first on the ground, not worrying about that spacesuit failing. You're out of your mind, man. And on top of that, there's not one engineer that I know that would allow that suit to be jumped around in like that on its first ever expedition to an uncharted fucking planet. A heavenly body that nobody's ever stepped on before. And let's not even talk about the mathematics necessary to get to the moon. You expect me to believe that they went to the moon with a Game Boy's worth of technology and the power that it takes to power a fucking toaster or a vacuum cleaner? Man, you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. Not to mention, it's impossible to do the mathematics required to get to the moon because you're accounting for more than two bodies in motion. Okay, mathematics breaks down when you put a third body into any equation because there become so many anomalies that it's impossible for you to calculate even with today's supercomputer technologies. So how are you getting to the moon when you have to calculate more than two bodies because that equation requires calculating more than just the speed of the Earth and the moon? There's so many other variables in there that it would be impossible. Impossible. Especially with the technology that they were working with. It's just insane. Like, they were working with analog switches, transistors. You're telling me that you're placing your faith in that old school technology where you have to push a button and depend on an analog response, and you're putting those analog switches into an environment that they've never been to. Absolutely have never been to. You have no idea whether or not they're going to work in that environment, but no, you're just going to send it up there anyway. It just boggles my mind that these men would volunteer for this. So let's assume that they did all of this with this technology and they managed to get back home safe and sound. Put yourself in their shoes during that first interview that they did when they got home and tell me that those men aren't lying. They look like they just watched their puppy get shot in the face. I'm telling you right now, if I was the first man to ever walk on the moon and come back home and accomplish that, I would be screaming from the rooftops, professing the glory of that achievement until the day that I died. Okay, if I knew that it was true and I actually experienced it, and I had all these people telling me that I was full of shit, you better believe that I'm going to come out and prove them wrong. On top of that, I should have the evidence to do so because I've been there. But what they're saying isn't compelling. It's not. And anybody that actually experienced something like that would be able to put it into words that would be able to convince the masses that it actually happened. Rather, none of their stories actually matched up at all. They were extremely emotionless after that interview, during the interview, and then after the interview, they didn't do very many more. They didn't have the public exposure that one would think that they would have. Okay, now let's talk about their first-hand accounts of actually being on the moon and flying through space. None of their stories match up at all. Some people say they see stars, others say they haven't. Meanwhile, none of the pictures we've ever seen from space show pictures of the stars. None. Absolutely none. And now, let's not get into the documentary A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, because I don't know how anybody can throw that evidence out the window and not say that NASA's full of shit. Because what that video demonstrates is them faking a picture of the moon by turning off every single light inside that spacecraft, and faking a picture of the moon by, not the picture of the moon, a picture of the Earth, by framing it in one of their circular windows and using a piece of cardboard or a piece of paper for the Terminator line. And this evidence was given to somebody on accident during Freedom of Information Act, right? They requested the footage or whatever of all the moon landings, etc., etc. And this gem that had been hidden away inside of NASA's fucking vaults for years and years just managed to pop up in this box. And you know, this makes a lot of sense to me. So let's take this back to the interviews. These people were emotionless. It was like they were hiding something. You could read it all over their face. None of their stories matched up. And then they were denied public access for a long time. Armstrong became a recluse, etc., etc., etc. And this is exactly what happened. So there's no way around this. And later on in life, these men were interviewed by the same person who did the documentary, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, and they were asked to testify with their hand on a Bible that they had set a foot on the moon, and not only that, they'd be given money to give to charity. Now, a funny thing is, this documentary producer, director, got punched in the face by one of these astronauts when he was confronted and asked to do this, with money on the line for charity, mind you. Now, like I said, if I was an astronaut and I set foot on the moon and somebody was there questioning the greatest accomplishment of mankind and I knew it was true, do you think I would let them get away with something like that and have me not put my hand on the Bible and take that money from them? Because I know for a fact it's true, right? Now, the only logical explanation as to why they wouldn't put their hand on the Bible is because they know for a fact that the heliocentric model is nonsense and they never set foot on the moon, okay? And they know for a fact that there's a creator, because if they never went to the moon, these men are smart enough to figure out the grand scheme of things here, okay? There's only one other conclusion, there's only one other model that fits our observations. Just think about that for a second. Now, let's go back to another member of NASA. Let's put ourselves in his shoes. This man is Wernher von Braun, Hitler's right-hand man as far as scientific warfare technologies. Developed the modern-day rocket, okay? And after World War II, he was brought over to the United States in Operation Paperclip. And he was given control at NASA right from the very beginning, and he developed our rocket program. Now, this man was quoted, in order to get to the moon, not only would we need a rocket that was equivalent to 3 Empire State Buildings in size to get to the moon, it would require us getting to an orbiting launch station first. Now, when this man died, he put on his tombstone Psalms 19:1, and what this says is that there is a firmament above our head, and it showeth God's handiwork. Okay? Why would the creator of NASA, the founder, the man that engineered all this technology supposedly, be declaring after he died on his tombstone that there is a firmament and it declares the glory of God and showeth his handiwork? Ask yourself this. Why? Not only that, the woman that did all his speeches and took care of him, like his PCA, personal care assistant, that might not be what you called him back then, but that's what she did. She spoke for him. She dictated all his fucking writings. She was very, very close with him. He constantly talked about an alien invasion being faked. And that was the final step of the process for world control and world domination. And he also predicted the rise of terrorism as a means of control. And then he said after the terrorism that they would pit us against each other with race wars. So let's just say what this man predicted is 100% accurate. Now, let's get back to his origins, because this is where things become important, and you have to realize This man straight up put us in prison, and he tried to give us the key to our cells when he died by putting Psalms 19:1 on his tombstone. And he confessed on his deathbed to this woman his deepest secrets, even though he never went into detail, okay? So, if he felt guilty and had a conscience, and he's going to sit there and tell us that he more or less faked space, what better way to do it than give a scripture of Psalms 19:1 that tells you the whole story? You just have to put the pieces together. Now this man, right, like I said it would require 3 rockets the size of the Empire State Building and an orbital launch to get to the moon. However, shortly thereafter, he supposedly put men on the moon with the rockets that we saw. And not to mention that, man, they never accounted for the Van Allen radiation belts like I mentioned before. They had to go through them to get to the moon, but they never accounted for them. And meanwhile, we don't have the technology today to get stuff through them without frying our human beings, and they admit this on video. So ask yourself this, as an astronaut, why would you ever put faith in a technology that's never been tested in those radiation conditions? Why would you put your life in the hands of that technology going through the Van Allen radiation belts? And then when you get back and you're interviewed about the Van Allen radiation belts, you say, well, we never went through them. And then this person mentions in the interview, well, you definitely did because you had to have. And he's like, well, then we must have went really fast. What I'm trying to say is, look at the people that they choose to fly airplanes for the United States of America, whether it be the Marines, the fucking Air Force, the Navy. Okay, I was in ROTC and I had an instructor that flew Harriers, okay? He was a colonel. He's a very, very intelligent man. No-nonsense type of guy. If you asked him a question, he had an answer for it, or he told you he did not know. There was no bullshit with that man. And I respect him for it. But that's the type of character that they choose when you qualify for the Air Force or the Marines. If you're going to fly one of those planes, they need to know that you're a no-nonsense, no bullshit, by-the-book kind of guy. Meanwhile, look at these people that they're putting on the moon. Look at the people that they're putting in the ISS. They're dumb. They're goofy. They make absolutely no sense in the grand scheme of things when you try to compare them to the pool of applicants that are applying for these positions. Why are you choosing these people when there's so many more well-qualified people? Doesn't make any sense. So what I'm trying to do in this video is show you, all you have to do is put yourself in the shoes of one of these astronauts and ask yourself these basic questions, because if you try to do the math and put yourself in their position, you'll come to realize that no sane human being would ever volunteer for a program like that in its infancy. None. And then on top of that, you would have never acted like you did during it. And on top of that, right, you're going to come home and you're going to scream from the rooftops for the rest of your life that there's space. And you're going to profess that we need to keep exploring. And not only that, Russia would have followed you there, because let's face it, why has nobody been back? And on top of that, why did we destroy the technology to go? Why are we dependent on Russia to get to the fucking ISS, etc., 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 etc.? It goes against everything we've ever seen in our entire lives. It goes against all of human nature as far as the emotions of these astronauts and the way that they acted when they were on the moon. The anomalies of the fact that you had to have taken a picture every 10 seconds to get there. The fact that they got on this rover and drove around and made fucking donuts and shit like that, risking the fact that they're gonna flip, let alone the fact that these spacesuits were never tested in a vacuum. They never trained in a vacuum. The only time they did test one in a vacuum, the person almost died. And on top of that, the quote not matching reality as far as one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It wasn't a small step, it was a 4-foot drop, and he would have torn his suit on all of the fucking sharp points around him when he was climbing down those stairs. Go look at the picture, man. Like, it's just crazy when you add things up and you think about the laws of thermodynamics and the Van Allen radiation belts and the technology required as far as fucking the megabytes it would have taken for them to go there. Just don't tell me that it makes sense, because it doesn't. Put yourself in their shoes and ask those questions, and you will come to the realization real quick They never had the training required to go. Their emotions don't match the experience. Therefore, they never went. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching.